Hello, everybody. Today I want to talk about the classic science fiction film from 1956, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which was directed by Don Siegel, starred Kevin McCarthy and Dana Winter. This film is based on a novel. I've read this novel. This is called The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney. And there's been many film adaptations of this book, and I'll be talking about some of them in later videos, but this 1956 film was the very first adaptation. Some might still consider it the best adaptation. That's debatable, but it's still one of the must-watch films of the 1950s. So, yeah, mentioned the director, Don Siegel, who directed a lot of film noirs. He would later direct some westerns with Clint Eastwood. So Don Siegel is a dynamic director who could work in many different genres, and he didn't work in science fiction too much. And this film really has a noir quality to it. It's a very fast-paced movie. It's about 80 minutes, so it's a very brief film. It moves very quickly. The story is well told. The direction and the acting and the writing, everything is just really, really well done in this movie. So I should talk about what it's about a little bit. So this version of the story is set in a small town in California, an idyllic small town where everything seems perfect on the surface, and Kevin McCarthy is a small town doctor in the town, and Dana Winter plays an old girlfriend of his who is back in town living with her father, I believe, and she's recently divorced and he's recently divorced too. So there's a little bit of a romance at the center of the story, but they quickly discover that things aren't going well in the town, and there's something very strange is going on in Santa Mira, which is the name of the town. There's a child who swears that I believe a relative, a grandmother, I believe, is not acting like herself, and they start to hear more and more of this where people are talking about loved ones who are simply, they can't, it's hard to pinpoint, but they're not acting like they're like themselves, and as we quickly discover that there is something happening in the town, we do have a sort of an alien invasion happening where bodies are being duplicated and being replaced by a new, more emotionless, soulless type of people. And as Kevin McCarthy and Dana Winter realize, more and more people in the town are starting to turn into pod people. They have to figure out a way to stop this from happening, and the film actually begins with the end of the film. There's a framing device in this movie where we're with Kevin McCarthy at the beginning, and he's freaked out, and he's telling this outrageous story about pods and people and all this, and then we go back to the beginning of the story, and then we kind of circle back to the end of the story. So as far as, like I said, the acting is really good in this movie. It's and it's such a portrait of the 1950s. It's the houses, like one of Miles's friends is a writer, and he has this house with this kind of really cool bar in the house and a backyard with a barbecue. We have like a lot of like really cool 1950s houses in this movie, which I always like about it. Just the idea of a small town where everyone knows each other, and now everyone is starting to become very suspicious of each other. That's always a great setup for a story. And there's a little bit of, I mentioned the fact that both of the lead characters are divorced, and that was fairly progressive for the 1950s, where divorce was still something of a social taboo or something that movies did not handle casually, and yet the issue is handled somewhat casually in this movie, like it's nothing, not a big deal at all. So there is that aspect of the film. As far as getting into the interpretations of the movie, which is always an interesting discussion, as far as who or what do the pod people represent, and one of the, well, you have different theories. One is that this movie is about communism and the Cold War as a big theme, and the fear that the pod people could symbolize communists, like a society where all distinctions break down, class distinctions and all this, and just kind of this very conformist society of something like that. Or there's the idea of the pod people being more of a fascist situation, like Nazi Germany, where you have them all starting to work together to force everybody to conform to the new ways, the new society, by force if they have to. Or you can read this as a movie as a commentary on McCarthyism, which this movie is 1956, so McCarthy's left the political scene by this point, but the shadow of McCarthy would really, to this day, I think, continues to shape American politics, and the idea of McCarthyism, this paranoia about communism everywhere in American society was making everyone afraid to voice their opinions and things like that. So, all those interpretations are interesting. I think ultimately, though, I find that people tend to, I think, project their own politics onto the pod people and see what they see. But I think the one message is that totalitarianism, in whatever form it is a bad thing. I think that's my big takeaway from it. And there's a big moment in the film where one thing with the pod people is that there's no emotion, and that we don't have to worry about the trappings of getting our feelings hurt or things like that. And Miles says, I want no part of a world like that. It's important that we feel emotions and we feel things, whether they're negative or positive. So there is this humanistic strain running through the story as well. I also like that there's a psychiatrist character played by Larry Gates who writes off what's happening in the town as a mass psychosis, of people believing things that are just in their imagination, like a massive breakdown of reality happening, and that's always an interesting thread in the film too, and how the psychiatrist tries to explain everything, and the later version, 1970s, would have a similar character, but kind of would take a different approach to it. So yeah, it's a great film to get a flavor for the 1950s, but also to think about the politics of the movie. I know a lot of people involved in the movie said there was no intention of politics being there, but all this was in the air in the mid-1950s. All the McCarthy stuff, the Cold War stuff, remnants from World War II, all that is still very much in the air. And I like how this movie is, in its own unconscious way, dealing with that. So yeah. So it's a perfect late night movie to watch late at night. It's a fast 80 minutes, and I think it's a great snapshot of the era. Film buffs this is famous part of trivia from the movie that Sam Peckinpah, the famous director, has a cameo appearance in this movie, which is always something film buffs will point out with Body Snatchers. And like I said, there was a remake in 1978 directed by Philip Kaufman, which I'll talk about eventually, and there was a version in the 1990s and one in the 2000s as well, but also a lot of other movies that weren't directly going to the source material from the Finney novel, but kind of running with that body snatcher concept, which is always great to do. And it's something that you can kind of, I think, whatever's happening, socially, politically at that given time, this story is always a fascinating way to deal with it, which is what makes this a really, I think, a really important movie, but a really a movie that's a lot of fun too. I mean, it's not a terrifying film in any ways. But there are some chilling moments in the film if you've not seen it before, and things like that too. So it's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, great film. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.